live on a planet of water. Water captivates our senses. Water is fun. No water, no life. There are regions in the world that show how we can respect and use water better in the future. God created the heavens and the earth, but we created the Netherlands. That's the self-confident credo of the people here. The Dutch have tamed the sea with dikes, have drained swamps, and crisscrossed their country with countless canals and waterways. But nature is threatening to strike back harder than ever before. Climate change is whipping up the storms and raising sea levels more and more. In the face of rising floods and sea levels, the people have to find new ways of living with water. Traditional solutions of the Dutch are no longer enough to keep the low-lying country safe. So the Dutch have made a new pact with water. How does this work? Millions of tourists stream into Amsterdam every year. The picturesque canals throughout the city are a well-known attraction. Less well-known is that for centuries the canals not only served as transport links and sewers, but again and again posed a threat to Amsterdam. Marcel Stiefer was born and grew up here. As a civil engineer, he's devoted his life to the battle against water, like many generations of Dutchmen before him. He sees water as both a friend and an enemy.
As you can see by the dates on the buildings and bridges, the city expanded greatly in the 17th century. Floods posed a major threat in those days. The Dutch were sailing the oceans as far as Asia, and they started from here, in Amsterdam.
At the time, Amsterdam had an open connection to the North Sea, so storm tides could flood into the city. As a warning, in 1683, the mayor had marble plaques put up.
This is one of the 6 remaining plaques. It marks the height of the worst flood level known at the time. It was to keep reminding the people of Amsterdam that any lower-lying buildings were threatened.
Large freighters still cross the paths of boating enthusiasts and tourists. The port of Amsterdam is still connected to the North Sea, but the Dutch keep the ebb and flood of the tides away from the city with a system of locks and pumps. which is just as well. Today, Amsterdam lies an average of 1 meter below sea level. Some districts are even lower.
If
it weren't for the locks, Amsterdam would no longer be habitable. There'd be water everywhere, about a meter higher than now. Look around. That wouldn't be funny. When you add the tide levels of, say, another meter, no one could live here.
Amsterdam is not alone. The name Nether or Lower Lands is spot on. About a quarter of the land lies below sea level. So as not to go under, the Dutch have been reinforcing their coasts for centuries, with solid dikes as well as with sand. 250 kilometers of sand dunes and beaches curb the force of the waves. For most Dutch people and tourists from abroad, the sandy coast is above all a great place for leisure activities. The beach at Kijkduin, outside The Hague, is one of the country's favourites. Marcel Stiever often comes here, but as a coastal engineer, he's worried about this stretch of the Dutch coast.
Een kust is inderdaad zeer dynamisch. Wat golven dan kunnen doen met een kust.
This coast is very dynamic. Waves and currents can wash away whole sections of it. And where the dune belt is not wide enough, the dikes can even be breached.
Kan er een doorbraak optreden.
Every year, the sea washes away huge amounts of sand from the coast, which the Dutch are endlessly fighting against. Every 5 years or so, Kijkduin and many other sections of the coast become major construction sites. Heavy equipment spreads sand from the seabed to reinforce the coast.
Maar als natuurlijk de zeespiegelstijging doorzet,
if the sea level keeps on rising, we'll be repairing more and more frequently. But is it a good idea to turn the whole ecosystem upside down every couple of years?
Instead of piling up sand more and more often, in 2011, Marcel Stiever and his team of engineers risked something completely new. Using around 20 million cubic meters of sand, 5 times more than usual, they built a huge hook-shaped peninsula, which they called the sand motor, 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. The idea was exceptional, turning the sea from an enemy into a friend. Nature itself would distribute the heaped-up sand along the coast over the following 20 years, all on its own, and for that period no further beach repairs would be necessary. Is it working? Scientists check to see every 2 months. Where exactly is the sand being washed to? Where are the currents taking it? Using jet skis, the coastal engineers measure the depth of the lagoon enclosed by the sand motor and at the shore to the open sea. And they keep a watch on the beach around the clock. The surveillance cameras on what's called the Argus Tower record even short-term changes. After 5 years, things are looking good. The collaboration with nature is working. As planned, the waves and current are distributing the sand from the hook-shaped sand motor along the coast. This gentle coastal defence has also gone down well with visitors. The sheltered lagoon has become one of the favourite spots for kite surfers in the Netherlands.
Het begint langzamerhand steeds duidelijker te worden.
It's clearer and clearer that coastal protection has to grow along with the rising sea level. And that's just not possible with a fixed construction.
Met zeespiegelstijging. En dat is met een gefixeerde constructie gewoon niet mogelijk. En die zal altijd
Rigid structures are doomed to failure. That doesn't mean they can't be used sometimes, but in the end, solid dikes will always give way.
In the end gedoemd te falen.
Doing away with rigid dikes, an almost revolutionary idea for Dutch people. Abandoning the path they've taken for so very many years. 1953 saw the great catastrophe that changed the country forever. A storm flood hit the south of the Netherlands. Over 1,800 people lost their lives. "200,000 farm animals drowned in the floodwaters. The answer of the Dutch to the tragedy was an orgy of stone, concrete and steel. They built a bastion of gigantic dikes and sea defences along the southern coast, known as the Delta Works. Entire estuary branches of the Rhine and the Meuse were cut off from the sea. The biggest component in the defence chain is the Eastern Scheldt storm surge barrier, a monument to Dutch engineering skills. Completed in 1986, the 3-kilometre-long dam has 62 huge sluice gates, which can be closed within an hour, sealing off the bay behind from the North Sea. This is done whenever a powerful storm flood is threatened, once a year on average. But the heyday of these gigantic structures seems to have passed, partly because they are such a huge encroachment on nature. The Eastern Scheldt, the vast bay behind the storm barrier, has been changing. At first, only the people who lived and worked here noticed. The small town of Eerzeke on the Eastern Scheldt is famous nationwide for its fishermen and for a culinary speciality. Oysters have been cultivated here since 1870. The annual production of 2,500 tons is modest compared with France. But the Zeeland oyster is prized by gourmets as a special delicacy. Johnny Doher has worked here for over 50 years. Generations of his family have harvested oysters, mussels and lobster in the Eastern Scheldt. He was very skeptical about the construction of the storm flood barrier.
Dus het is gewoon beveiligd helemaal.
True, everything is now secure in the Eastern Scheldt. But the government just built it, without much thought. In retrospect, it's a disappointment. Above all, because they didn't reckon with nature. Nature decides for herself what happens.
Shortly after the barrier was completed, Johnny Doge and his fellow fishermen noticed a gradual change taking place. They sail out into the eastern Scheldt every day to cultivate and harvest their oysters and mussels. Every fisherman has his defined patch. They saw it firsthand. The barrier significantly reduced the current in the bay by an estimated 30 or 40%. That sounds harmless enough, but it has far-reaching consequences. The current change also upset the movement of sand and silt. That's not good for cultivating mussels, and it endangers the coast. Scientist Tom Isebaert has been studying this phenomenon and is worried about the sandbanks at the edges of the eastern Scheldt. As with mudflats, when the tide goes out, large areas of sand and silt emerge. Since the current no longer brings in enough sediment, these sandbanks are shrinking.
Tegelijkertijd zijn die getijdenplaten ook van belang voor de dijken.
These sandbanks are important for the dikes because they slow down the waves, thereby protecting the dikes from the water's onslaught. The storm barrier has led to sand famine. The banks are being eroded and washed away.
Tom Isebaert looked for a way to secure the sandbanks and thereby the dikes. And he found an ally in nature, the oyster. They also breed in the eastern Scheldt outside of the farms. His idea was for oysters to establish themselves around the endangered sandbanks, thereby holding the sand and silt together. But oysters need something for their swimming larvae to hold on to. Tom Isebaert got the very thing from the fishermen in Ierseke: empty oyster shells. Held together by wire mesh, they form an artificial reef, which living oysters can inhabit. He and his colleagues have carefully charted how the reef came to life and has grown from year to year. As the wire mesh slowly rusts away, the oysters form a living coastal protection system.
We can't just think the dikes out of existence, but we can include the ecosystem in coastal protection measures. We want the mudflats, the oyster reef and the dunes to be given far more attention.
Another advantage, the oyster banks can grow along with the rising sea level. So nature is once more helping the Dutch to arm themselves against climate change. The battle against water has shaped the Dutch for centuries and created these structures for which this small coastal country is famous around the world. Alex van der Perk looks after this legacy. He's one of over 1,500 volunteer windmillers in the Netherlands. One of his jobs is to keep the mill running, and to preserve the knowledge of how it works. Like thousands of others in the country, his windmill had only one purpose: to use the power of the wind to pump water. The Netherlands is threatened not only by the sea, but also by the groundwater and rivers. Large areas in the west of the country would be uninhabitable swamp if it weren't for drainage. The Dutch turned this swamp into arable land. From the 15th century onwards, they developed a sophisticated system of ditches in order to pump the water from the low-lying fields first into canals and then into rivers. The Polders, as these fields are known, still have to be constantly drained today. That's no longer done by windmills. A host of modern electric pumps have taken over. But through the permanent drainage work, the Dutch have given themselves another problem. The drained, marshy ground has sagged down. So many polders now lie below the level of the mighty Meuse and Rhine rivers which flow through them. If high water caused a river dike to burst, the low-lying polders would instantly flood. Over the centuries, the Dutch people have got used to this danger. They have had faith in their dikes, as here in the Overdiepse polder in the Bergse Maas district southeast of Rotterdam. This is where the Vleerackers family have their farm, a typical Dutch dairy farm with about 100 cows and calves. Stan Vleerackers had no worries about his family's safety. It's the government that's responsible for building and maintaining the dikes. Like most Dutch people, he felt well protected. Stan's wife, Yvonne, grew up in the polder. The farm used to belong to her parents. She also didn't see the water of the nearby river as a threat.
We had no problems in the polder. The old dike was high and protected us from floods.
Water was fun and lovely. Our wedding picture shows us together in the boat. We were very close to the water.
This untroubled relationship to the water took a hard knock in 1993 and again in 1995. Within a short space of time, 2 record high water levels on the Meuse and the Rhine threatened the country, portents of climate change. In 1995 especially, the situation was extremely critical. 250,000 people had to be evacuated. The authorities were afraid the dikes would give way in many places.
The dike was under surveillance. We lay in bed at night in fear of flooding.
The water began to seep through the dike. When I drove the children to school in the morning, there was a lot of water coming through in some places. That no longer felt safe to me.
The dikes held. Everything seemed fine. But after the high water receded, came a government announcement no one had expected. The dikes at the Overdiepse polder were not to be raised, but lowered. The next time the river ran extremely high, the polder would be flooded, deliberately, so that the large populations of the cities downriver would be spared from flooding. It was clear from the plan that the Vleerackers farm would never be safe again.
It would have meant our house and farm buildings being under 3 or 4 meters of water. Everything would have to be evacuated. That was the government's original plan. It was completely unreal, just unbelievable.
We were ready for a fight. We weren't going to put up with it.
The inhabitants of the polder joined forces and looked for a way out. They didn't want to give up their homes, but also recognized their responsibility for people in the rest of the country. They discussed everything at length and finally presented the government with their own plan. When the rivers were extremely high, the polder would be flooded, but their houses would be safe at all times. But that in turn meant all the farms on the polder would first have to be demolished. A tough decision for Yvonne.
It was really bad when the bulldozers turned up sooner than expected. They flattened everything in the garden. I was furious. I had wanted to take my flowers and shrubs to the new garden, taking a piece of history with us to the new house. That really hurt.
Before the dikes were lowered, new houses were built at the very edge of the polder. The new farms were built on raised land to ensure the owners would remain high and dry under extreme flood conditions. Like their neighbours, the Vleerackers have 15 exhausting years behind them. But they're happy with their new modern home. They've also expanded their farm, buying more land and cows. And they've equipped their new cowshed with cutting-edge robots, which milk the cows completely automatically. The Vleerackers have paid for it with personal loans. The government only bought their old farm at a market price. Now they're waiting, rather anxiously, for the next extreme flood to arrive. Maybe next year, or not for 20 years. But after all the battles, they're also proud of what they've done for their country.
We've protected 4 million people by enabling the polder to be flooded. I don't imagine these 4 million have any idea what this small community's been through to to make that possible.
Dat eigenlijk voor elkaar te krijgen.
The story of the Vleerackers and the Overdiepse Polder is part of the large-scale Room for the River programme. This foresees nothing less than renouncing faith in ever higher dikes and ever stronger flood barriers. In recent years, at over 30 places along the rivers of the Netherlands, a new pact with water has been made. Ralph Gastra works for the National Water Management Authority, the Rijkswaterstaat. He's responsible for the most radical project in the Room for Rivers programme.
Nou, ik denk dat dit heel speciaal is. Nederland staat
This
toch
is
wel bekend
something
als
quite
dijkenbouwers.
unprecedented.
Maar mensen vanuit de stad en
The
nogmaals
Netherlands
buitenlanders,
actually has the reputation of building dikes.
in het denken hoe je omgaat met
Here people can see
waterveiligheid.
that we can adopt a completely different approach to water.
Maatregelen zijn genomen en waar eigenlijk
We're giving land back to the river as flood protection.
wanneer het extreem hoog water is.
Here in the Nordwaard district, houses and farms have also been rebuilt on flood hills. But there's a big difference from the Vleerackers polder. The dikes here were lowered so far that the river floods parts of the polder several times a year. The water then flows under special flood bridges. Agriculture is no longer possible here. Lots of farmers had to sell their land to the state. For them, an extremely painful experience.
Ik heb wel geleerd dat je bij een boer gewoon eigenlijk niet...
I have learned that a farmer's land is best left alone. It's not about money. Some farming families have lived here for generations, and that has an emotional value. It's very, very hard to give them news like that.
Heel lastig mee kan langskomen.
Sjaak Belder is one of the farmers who had to give up land for the new flood protection measures. He used to raise pigs and grow fodder crops for them. His father and grandfather were farmers. The plans of the government to open the Nordwaard to the river had them up in arms.
Tegenwerk wel heel dikwijls geprobeerd wel daar
We tried to resist it.
te geven met heel veel dingen.
Together with other farmers, we fought for our land.
Collega's en soms wat particulier erbij wel heel wat keren strijd van een bepaalde punten en strijd gemaakt.
But you can't win. You can't beat the state.
En Waterstaat heeft onteigeningsmogelijkheden vanwege...
The government had the upper hand because it was in the national interest. Either you agree or they do a compulsory purchase. They're always in the right.
Want ze hebben uiteindelijk toch altijd gelijk.
It was Ralph Gastra's job to reach a settlement with the farmers. He had long talks with each of them, looking for alternatives. For Sjaak and Brigitte Belder as well.
Dat zal dan in zijn privaatrecht
Niemand, hij kan het wel zien.
die ook.
Leuk in de groep natuurlijk. Ik hou wel van...
For them, there was no question of buying land and a farm somewhere else, but they felt too young to retire.
Een golfbeweging heel veel moeite mee.
Finally, they found a way to stay. Right next to their house, At the edge of the flood area, they opened a camping site. Where forage maize used to grow for their animals, they now take good care of their guests. The Polders are absorbed in their new work, and it's nowhere near as onerous as raising pigs. The new approach to flood protection has changed not only their life, but also fundamentally the landscape of their polder.
We never imagined that it could be so nice here in the Nordwaard, for leisure and recreation. It's more popular than we'd expected.
In the Nordwaard, a new and, for the Netherlands, unique landscape has come into being. Instead of pastures and fields, here in the heart of the Netherlands are scenes reminiscent of Africa. A herd of semi-wild horses graze here throughout the year. They are Konigs, a breed thought to be descended from the last wild horses of Eastern Europe. To keep the floodplains free of bushes and trees, a group of water buffalo have been introduced to the polder. If you're lucky, you can catch them taking a bath in the floodwater. Parts of the polders have been left to grow wild. They now belong to the directly adjoining de Biesbosch National Park. This is the preserve of a young ranger, Thomas van der Is. He's fascinated by the way the water here has turned farmland into a natural landscape over the last few years.
Daar was een weg en daar zie je de bomen dus inderdaad nu dood en kaal staan. Het was echt een heel strak
Back there was a path. The trees are now dead and bare. There were great fields of sugar beet and potatoes, and there behind a farmhouse. They got land somewhere else, or gave up.
Elders in de regio, elders in het land, of zijn gestopt met boeren.
It's hard to believe that here we're standing on what used to be farmland. Now it's a swamp that seems to have been here forever.
Dat er altijd al geweest is.
To appreciate the full beauty of the Biesbosch, you need a boat. The central part of what's now the national park was abandoned to the water after the great St. Elizabeth's flood of 1421. It's a purely freshwater area, but the tides of the North Sea can still be felt as they back up the Rhine. In the labyrinth of tributaries, bays and ponds, the water rises and falls every day by about 30 centimeters. This unique sanctuary is now home to rare animal species. For the last few years, one of the few pairs of sea eagles in the Netherlands have been raising their young here. Around and under the water, a veritable jungle has grown up. This is home to remarkable creatures. catfish, Europe's biggest freshwater predator fish, lies in wait for its prey. It can grow over 2 meters in length and live to be up to 80 years old. Going through the Biesbosch National Park, you can catch a glimpse of what the Netherlands must have looked like before people shaped the landscape and waterways.
Het is in heel Europa een hele bijzondere plek, want hier komen de grootste...
This is unique throughout Europe. We're a small country. Everything is orderly. Cultivated land, industry, Rotterdam with its huge port. But then there's also this place, where nature has its own space, and you see immediately that something special emerges.
Just 25 kilometers away as the crow flies is Rotterdam. Over 2 million people live in this metropolitan region. The port is the biggest in Europe. The people here have to cope with climate change on all sides. Storm floods come from the North Sea, floodwater from the Rhine. As if that weren't enough, there's another climate phenomenon. Heavy rainfall is more and more frequent, overtaxing the drainage system and sometimes causing serious flooding and major damage. The urban planners are trying to tackle the problem by creating places where rainwater can collect without damage. These water plazas, as they're known, are aimed at making Rotterdam climate-proof. This square still holds the water from last night's rain. It will slowly drain away over the next few hours. Then the pupils at the surrounding schools can use the square again. It's a good opportunity for Arnoud Molenaar to appraise the project. He supervises all Rotterdam's climate-proofing activities.
We
designed the square for use as a basketball court or a stage under normal circumstances. But with extreme rainfall, it can fill up. Controlled flooding. On the one hand, this makes us more resistant to climate change. On the other, it makes the city more attractive.
In recent years, Rotterdam has massively extended its flood control measures. When it rains heavily, the Westerzingel Canal in the heart of the city can also retain water. But the most unusual protection against heavy rain is to be found high above the streets of Rotterdam. The soil on planted roofs retains rainwater. Over 200,000 square meters of roof are already blooming in the city. One of the biggest projects is the rooftop farm. Vegetables, fruit and herbs are grown here. For Arnoud Molenaar, the green roofs are an important element in safeguarding Rotterdam against climate change. And not only because roofs retain rainwater.
Dat isoleert de gebouwen. De daken die gaan langer mee.
Roof gardens also insulate buildings, make them more durable and provide a more pleasant climate. We won't only have more heavy rain in future, it's going to be warmer as well. The more green roofs we have, the more balanced the city climate.
Dus het komt ook ten goede aan het stadsklimaat.
In addition, the roof garden is also a social meeting place. Everyone working here is a voluntary helper from the neighborhood.
Maar het is vooral een hele prettige plek om te zijn. En je merkt
Above all, it's a very pleasant place to be. Most of the visitors have climbed up 7 floors to get here. And once here, they smile and say, "Wow, what a beautiful place."
The roof farmers even have their own bee colony. The bees pollinate the plants and supply the honey that's sold in the rooftop cafe. The buildings and housing in the Netherlands are part of the new direction in the fight against climate change and increasing floods, in Rotterdam and throughout the country. People here have always lived with and by the water. But if some visionary plans come to fruition, the Dutch will increasingly be living on the water. Waterstudio.nl is an architectural practice near The Hague, specializing in floating buildings. Creative head of the practice is the young architect Koen Althuis. He sees rising water levels caused by climate change also as an opportunity.
Als je naar Nederland kijkt, is echt...
The Netherlands is like a huge machine. Every day we pump as much water out of the Polders as the Tokyo region uses in a year. On the other hand, we have too little land to build on. The answer is to build on water. We make use of the water and create housing.
En woningen.
In a government project, planners and architects began experimenting back in 2005 in 15 flood-prone areas. In the Eiburg district of Amsterdam, they created the biggest floating residential estate to date. The buildings look different, but they all work the same way. They're anchored to steel piles. When the water level rises, it lifts them up. The financial crisis held up the development in the Netherlands, but it's now picked up again. Particularly in the densely populated conurbation from Amsterdam to The Hague and on to Rotterdam, building land is expensive and hard to find. Moorings for floating houses are much easier to come by. That somewhat offsets the higher technical costs.
Zo, tekenzetel.
Building contractor Olaf Janssen has been living on water for 2 years. He's so pleased with his home that he himself has started working in the floating home sector. Together with Koen Althuis, he's trying to ensure more people can afford this type of home.
Iedereen is nieuwsgierig. Mensen vinden het heel interessant.
Everyone's curious. People find it really exciting. Everyone who comes here is thrilled. Space, nature. I get only positive reactions. And a lot of people actually want to live like this.
En dan heel langzaam wordt het mainstream.
It's slowly becoming mainstream. At the moment, we're working on floating apartments, as well as social housing. The technology, which only wealthy people could afford at first, is spreading. Floating homes for the masses.
Koen Oldhuis even dreams of whole cities built on water. He envisages floating schools and multi-story car parks that are flexible. If they're needed somewhere else after 5 or 10 years, the buildings can be simply moved on the water. His revolutionary ideas are now in demand around the world.
Initially, we just wanted to build in the Netherlands, but then we got inquiries from New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, all the major waterside cities. That's where the opportunities are.
Many countries around the world have similar problems to those of the Netherlands. Climate change is bringing more rain and flooding. And in coastal cities in particular, space is at a premium. Ecological ideas are also being exported to protect coasts in Asia with mangrove forests, for example.
Ecological coastal protection is no longer to be found just in the Netherlands, but more and more around the world as well. A new way of thinking that's spreading.
The trend towards gentle solutions, protecting coasts with sand and dunes instead of stone, concrete and steel, is moving out from the Netherlands into the rest of the world. The sand motor approach to rising sea levels could help in many countries. It not only makes sense, it's attractive as well.
Ja, het komt inderdaad regelmatig voor dat...
We're getting more and more inquiries about the sand motor. Not just for economic reasons, but simply because it's sexy. The mayor of Lima wants 3 of them.
De burgemeester van Lima zei, ik wil er 3.